The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people who sat in complete silence. The air felt heavy, almost like it carried the weight of something important. The dim lights overhead buzzed softly, casting a dull glow over the polished wooden benches. At the front of the room, Judge William Thornton sat high on his bench, tapping his fingers impatiently on the desk. He was an older man, well into his 60s, with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face from years of scowling at defendants. To him, this was nothing new, just another case, another face, another name. He had seen it all before. But what he didn't know was that today would be different. Today, the person sitting before him wasn't just another defendant. And today would be the day his arrogance cost him everything. At the defense table, Danielle Carter sat with perfect posture, her back straight, her expression calm and unreadable. She wore a crisp navy blue suit, and her dark hair was pulled back into a neat bun. Her presence was powerful, like someone who belonged there, but Judge Thornton didn't care to notice. To him, she was just another woman who had gotten herself into trouble. His smirk widened as he glanced down at the case file. He hadn't even heard her speak yet, but he had already made up his mind this would be easy. He let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Well, well," he said loudly, making sure the entire courtroom could hear. "Another entitled person who thinks the law doesn't apply to them." A few jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The prosecutor, a young man in his 30s, pressed his lips together but said nothing. Meanwhile, Danielle didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, waiting. Judge Thornton glanced up at her, his amusement growing. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're here to claim you were wrongfully arrested? That this is all just a big misunderstanding?" Soft laughter rippled through the room, but Danielle remained still. Then, ever so slightly, the corners of her lips curled upward. It wasn't the smile of someone nervous or embarrassed. It was the smile of someone who knew something no one else did. The prosecutor cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, the defendant, Miss Carter." Judge Thornton cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Let's not waste the court's time," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why don't you tell me why you think you're special?" Danielle finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, steady, and unwavering. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, locking eyes with him, "I'd prefer to stick to facts rather than opinions." For a split second, Judge Thornton's smirk faded, and in that moment, the entire courtroom shifted. Judge Robert Calloway leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers lazily on the desk. He had been doing this job for years, and he could tell how a case would end the moment a defendant walked in. In his mind, Danielle Carter was no different from the dozens of people he had seen before, just another person trying to talk their way out of trouble. He barely glanced at her as he smirked and flipped through the case file. He had already made up his mind, and nothing she said would change that. Danielle sat perfectly still at the defense table. She didn't fidget. She didn't look nervous. She just waited. But Judge Calloway wasn't interested in her confidence. He saw what he wanted to see: someone who didn't belong in his courtroom, someone wasting his time. "Miss Carter," he said, stretching out her name like it amused him. "You don't seem too worried. Should I assume you believe you did nothing wrong?" A few people in the audience chuckled under their breath. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to show that the judge had already turned this into a joke. The prosecutor, a younger man in his 30s, kept his expression neutral, but even he seemed uncomfortable. Danielle didn't respond right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if studying the man who had just mocked her. That tiny pause made the room feel even tenser. Judge Calloway smirked. "Let me guess," he continued. "You're about to tell me this is all some big mistake? That you were wrongfully arrested?" More soft laughter rippled through the room. To them, this was a show. A predictable routine. The judge made a joke, the audience reacted, and soon he would hand down his ruling. But Danielle didn't react the way he expected. She didn't stammer. She didn't frown. She didn't even blink. Instead, the faint smile on her face stayed exactly where it was. Calloway noticed it now: the way she held herself, the way she seemed almost too calm. His fingers stopped tapping on the desk. Danielle finally spoke, her voice smooth and even. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'd rather discuss facts than opinions." For a split second, Calloway's smirk wavered. Just a little. Just enough for those paying attention to notice. He quickly covered it up with a chuckle, shaking his head as if she had said something ridiculous. "Facts?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "All right, Miss Carter. Let's hear your facts." The courtroom was silent now, waiting. The playful energy from earlier had disappeared. Something was shifting, and even the people in the back rows could feel it. Danielle exhaled slowly and reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. The movement was smooth, controlled. The bailiff, standing nearby, instinctively stiffened, eyes locking onto her hand. Judge Calloway rolled his eyes, already preparing another sarcastic remark about reckless behavior. But then she pulled out a small black leather case and flipped it open. And just like that, everything changed. The moment Danielle reached into her blazer, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The bailiff took a small step forward, his body tensing. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed, watching her closely. Judge Robert Calloway, still smirking, leaned back in his chair, already forming a sarcastic comment in his mind. Danielle didn't rush. Every movement she made was slow and deliberate, like someone who had nothing to hide. She pulled out a small black leather case and placed it on the table in front of her. Then, with a flick of her fingers, she flipped it open. For a moment, the entire room was silent. Inside the case was a golden badge, its polished surface gleaming under the dim courtroom lights. The letters engraved across it were unmistakable. Judge Calloway's smirk vanished. The prosecutor's pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the table. A few jurors leaned forward, their eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Danielle sat back, completely calm. She let the moment stretch, allowing the weight of what she had just revealed to sink in. "My name," she said, her voice steady and clear, "is Special Agent Danielle Carter, United States Secret Service." The courtroom was frozen. Judge Calloway's face drained of color. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. For the first time in a long time, he had no words. The prosecutor scrambled to grab the case file, flipping through the pages like he had somehow missed something important. His eyes darted back to Danielle, then to the judge, then back to the file in disbelief. Danielle didn't move. She let them process it. Slowly, she reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a sealed government document. She slid it across the table toward the bailiff, who hesitated before picking it up. "This," she said, tapping the folder lightly, "is an official complaint drafted by the Department of Justice. It details the numerous violations committed by the officers who arrested me, including the falsified report that landed in this courtroom today." Judge Calloway swallowed hard. His hands, once confident and steady, now trembled slightly as he stared at the document. "You see, Your Honor," Danielle continued, her voice still calm, "the officers who arrested me never checked my credentials. Instead, they assumed that because of the color of my skin, I must have been doing something wrong." A heavy silence fell over the room. The jurors shifted uncomfortably. The spectators who had laughed just minutes ago now sat frozen, their faces pale. Even the prosecutor, who had started the trial so sure of himself, looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Calloway opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked down at the badge again, then at the folder in the bailiff's hands. Reality was crashing down on him like a tidal wave. Danielle straightened her blazer, her expression never changing. She had walked into this courtroom knowing exactly how this would play out. And now, as the judge sat there, humiliated and powerless, she knew she had just taken full control. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Danielle didn't hurry. She kept her movements controlled and calm, like someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. The courtroom was so quiet that you could hear the faint buzzing of the lights above. Judge Robert Calloway, still leaning back in his chair, raised an eyebrow as he watched her. He was ready for her to say something foolish, ready to shut her down with another sarcastic remark. But Danielle wasn't interested in making excuses or begging for sympathy. She wasn't like anyone else he had seen in his courtroom before. She placed the black leather case on the table, opened it slowly, and revealed a golden badge inside. The shiny surface of the badge glinted under the dim lights, catching everyone's eye. It was like the room had gone completely still. The air felt thick, heavy with the shock of what had just been revealed. Judge Calloway's eyes widened in disbelief. His fingers stopped tapping on the desk, and his smirk vanished. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain. He stared at the badge like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The prosecutor, who'd been sitting confidently just moments ago, froze. His pen slipped from his hand and clattered onto the table. The sound echoed in the silence, loud and jarring. He stared at the badge like it was a ghost, his face turning pale as his thoughts raced. Danielle kept her calm, letting the moment drag on for a few more seconds. She wasn't in a hurry. She knew this was the moment that would change everything. "My name," she said, her voice smooth and unwavering, "is Special Agent Danielle Carter, United States Secret Service." There was no reaction at first, no sound at all. It was like the entire courtroom had stopped breathing. Every person in the room seemed stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Judge Calloway's face drained of all color. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. The arrogance he had carried all through his career was gone, replaced by a deep, nervous uncertainty. The prosecutor fumbled through the case file, flipping through the pages as if looking for something to explain this new information. His eyes darted back and forth between Danielle and the judge, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Danielle let them struggle for a moment longer. She could feel their shock and confusion, and she knew this was her time to keep control. After a brief silence, she reached into her bag and pulled out another document. This time, it was a folder, sealed and official. She slid it across the table toward the bailiff. The bailiff hesitated, unsure of what to do with it. But slowly, he picked it up and looked at Danielle for instructions. "This," Danielle said, her voice still calm but now carrying more weight, "is an official complaint from the Department of Justice. It outlines several violations committed by the officers who arrested me, including a falsified report that made its way into this courtroom." The words hit the room like a punch. The weight of what she had just said hung in the air, and every person in the room felt it. The judge's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the desk, trying to hold himself together. But the panic was starting to show. Danielle's voice stayed steady as she continued. "The officers who arrested me never checked my credentials. Instead, they assumed that because of my skin color, I must have done something wrong." There was no laughter now. No whispers. The room was deathly silent, as if everyone was waiting for the next move. Judge Calloway looked at the badge again. He looked at the folder. His eyes were wide with disbelief. His confidence had shattered. He looked like a man who had just realized he had made a huge mistake. Danielle didn't give him a chance to respond. She straightened her blazer, a small but powerful gesture. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for something much bigger. Something far more important. Judge Robert Calloway sat there, frozen in place, his eyes still locked on the badge in front of him. His entire body felt heavy, like the weight of what was happening had finally hit him all at once. He had been so sure of himself just moments ago, confident in his ability to control the courtroom. But now, everything had changed. Danielle Carter had just revealed something that shook him to his core. She wasn't just some defendant in front of him. She was a special agent with the United States Secret Service. The same woman he had mocked, the same woman he had laughed at, was someone with more power and authority than he could ever imagine. His mind raced as he tried to process the truth of the situation. He glanced at the prosecutor, who was still fumbling with the papers in front of him, trying to find some explanation for the mess they were in. The prosecutor's face had turned pale, and his earlier confidence had vanished. There was no way he could have known what was coming. Judge Calloway turned his attention back to Danielle. Her face was calm, almost too calm. She wasn't gloating or rubbing her victory in his face. She was simply stating facts, and it was crushing him. For the first time in years, he felt completely out of control. He had always prided himself on his ability to handle every case, every person who walked into his courtroom. But now, he felt small. He felt foolish. Danielle's eyes met his, and she didn't look away. There was a fire in her gaze, a quiet power that made him feel even smaller. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "This is about a system that allows people like you to treat others with disrespect. You've spent your entire career hiding behind your position, but today, you're the one who's been exposed." The words stung, and Judge Calloway swallowed hard, trying to push them down. But he couldn't. She was right. The prosecutor jumped up from his seat, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. "Your Honor, in light of this new information, we request that all charges against Miss Carter be immediately dropped." Judge Calloway opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He knew he had no choice. He had no way to argue against the truth that had just been laid out in front of him. His hands gripped the edge of the desk again, and for a moment, it seemed like he might break. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced with fear and regret. He was trapped, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Finally, he cleared his throat and muttered, "Case dismissed." His voice barely carried above a whisper, but it was enough to signal the end of the trial. The gavel slammed down, but it wasn't his authority that made the sound, it was the weight of his humiliation. As Danielle gathered her things, the room remained silent. She stood tall, walking towards the door like she was leaving a place she had never truly belonged. The door opened with a soft creak, and she paused just before stepping out. She turned her head slightly, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Next time," she said, her words slow and deliberate, "think before you laugh." And with that, she stepped out of the courtroom, leaving behind a stunned and humiliated Judge Calloway. The room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. No one moved. No one knew what to say. But one thing was certain: Danielle Carter had just made her mark. She had exposed a system built on arrogance and ignorance, and in doing so, had taken down a judge who had never once questioned his own power. Outside the courtroom, Danielle's reputation would only grow stronger. The world would hear her story, and Judge Calloway would become nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one, no matter how high they sit, is above the truth. As Danielle walked out of the courtroom, she could hear the soft murmur of voices behind her. The whispers spread quickly, like wildfire. The people in the room couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. For years, they had watched Judge Robert Calloway command his courtroom with an air of superiority, treating everyone who walked through the doors like they were beneath him. But today, they had all seen him fall from his throne in front of their eyes. Danielle's steps were steady, unhurried. She had done what she set out to do. She had exposed the truth, and now the world would know. Outside the courthouse, the cool breeze hit her face as she stepped into the sunlight. She could feel the weight of the day's events lifting off her shoulders. It wasn't just about the judge. It was about something much bigger, something that affected everyone who had ever been treated unfairly simply because of who they were. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up with messages and notifications from friends, family, and colleagues. She had already become the talk of the town. Her name was everywhere, and for all the right reasons. But despite the attention, Danielle remained focused. She wasn't in this for the praise or the headlines. She was in it for the change. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her colleague at the Secret Service. It read, "You did it. Proud of you." Danielle smiled at the message. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. She had known that her actions would have consequences, but she never expected to feel so validated. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, the mood was drastically different. Judge Calloway sat in his office, his hands trembling as he stared at the empty space in front of him. His mind was racing, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the reality of what had just happened. For the first time in his career, he felt vulnerable. He had built his reputation on controlling every situation that came his way, but today, everything had slipped out of his grasp. The prosecutor, still in shock, walked into the judge's office. He had no idea what to say to him. What could he say? He had witnessed his own career being shaken by a single moment of truth. "Your Honor," the prosecutor started, his voice faltering. I don't know what to say." Judge Calloway looked up at him, his face pale. "You don't have to say anything," he muttered. "It's over." The prosecutor hesitated before speaking again. "What now?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Now we wait. We wait for the fallout. We wait for the world to know that I wasn't as untouchable as I thought." Outside, the air felt different. Danielle could already feel the ripple effect of what had happened. News outlets were buzzing with the story, social media was flooded with opinions, and people everywhere were talking about the courtroom drama that had just unfolded. Danielle wasn't concerned with the noise. She knew that the real work was just beginning. Later that night, her phone rang again. This time, it was a reporter. "Miss Carter," the voice on the other end said, "can we get a statement from you? The whole world is talking about you." Danielle thought for a moment before replying. The truth speaks for itself. What happened today wasn't about me. It's about the system. It's about holding people accountable for their actions, no matter who they are. The reporter paused, clearly impressed. "That's a powerful message." Danielle ended the call and leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in. The world was listening now, and she had made sure they were hearing the right message. Back at the courthouse, Judge Holloway was still reeling from the shock of the day. He knew the press would soon catch up with him, and when they did, he would have to answer for everything. His career, which had once seemed so solid, was now in jeopardy. The public would see him differently now. They would remember him not as the powerful judge he once was, but as the man who was brought down by the truth. Danielle knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet. She had made her point, but there was so much more work to be done. She wasn't going to let this moment fade away. She would continue to fight for justice, for equality, and for a world where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. As the days passed, Danielle became a symbol of courage and resilience. People everywhere were inspired by her bravery in standing up to someone who thought they could get away with anything. Her story became a rallying cry for those who had been ignored, mistreated, and forgotten. And as for Judge Holloway, he would have to live with the consequences of his actions. His arrogance had cost him everything, and there was no going back. But Danielle Carter? She had won, and the world would never forget her. The news about Judge Robert Holloway's shocking downfall spread faster than wildfire. It seemed like every TV channel, news site, and social media account had something to say about the courtroom drama that had unfolded just hours before. Danielle Carter had become a symbol of courage and strength, but the world's reaction was more mixed than anyone could have imagined. First, the headlines were all about her. Secret Service agent exposes arrogant judge in stunning courtroom moment, read one major news outlet. Everywhere you looked, Danielle's name was splashed across the front pages. People were praising her for standing up to power and exposing the truth. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," one social media user tweeted. Danielle Carter is the hero we need right now, but not everyone saw it that way. There were plenty of people who felt uncomfortable with how things went down. Some even claimed that Danielle had gone too far in embarrassing the judge, questioning whether her actions had been a little too extreme. But Danielle wasn't worried about the negative comments. She knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway's world was crumbling. His phone rang constantly with reporters asking for his side of the story. His office had never felt so empty, and the silence in the hallways of the courthouse was deafening. People who had once respected him were now questioning his every decision. He tried to keep his composure, but it was impossible. Every time he turned on the TV or checked his phone, there was Danielle calm, collected, and ready to take on the world. And there he was, the judge who had been made a fool of in front of everyone. In an attempt to save face, Judge Holloway issued a public statement, but it did little to quiet the storm. "The events in my courtroom today were unfortunate," he said. "I regret that things went as they did, but I stand by my decisions." The statement did nothing but fuel the fire. It was clear that the public wasn't buying it. People didn't want to hear excuses. They wanted accountability. And Danielle had given them exactly that. On the other side of the story, Danielle remained calm amidst the chaos. As much as she appreciated the support, she knew this was about something bigger than herself. It was about justice, fairness, and the importance of standing up against a broken system. The following week, Danielle appeared on several news programs, talking about what had happened in that courtroom. Her calm, unwavering voice cut through the noise, and each interview made her message clearer. "It's not just about what happened to me," she said. "It's about all the people who are overlooked, mistreated, and ignored by those who think they are above the law. I'm standing up for them." Her words resonated with millions. People who had been silent for too long now felt like they had a voice. They saw Danielle as a hero who wasn't afraid to speak out, even when it meant going up against someone with so much power. But even as Danielle's influence grew, Judge Holloway was still trying to salvage what little was left of his career. He called in his lawyer to discuss his next move, but deep down, he knew the damage had been done. The media had already made up their mind, and the public wasn't likely to forget what had happened anytime soon. The day after Danielle's interviews aired, she received a call from her supervisor at the Secret Service. "Danielle, you've made an impact," her supervisor said. "Your actions have brought attention to some serious issues, and we're proud of you." Danielle didn't let the praise go to her head. She was focused on the bigger picture, the work that still needed to be done. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. People who were uncomfortable with the changes she was pushing for would try to silence her. But she wasn't worried. She was ready for whatever came next. Back at the courthouse, the atmosphere was different. Staff members who once admired Judge Holloway were now avoiding him, unsure of what to say or how to act. His arrogance had cost him more than just his position. It had cost him the respect he'd worked so hard to build. In the days that followed, more details came to light about the misconduct that had taken place during Danielle's arrest. The officers involved in the incident were being investigated, and people were beginning to realize just how deep the corruption ran. Danielle's courage had done more than just expose a judge. It had opened up a much larger conversation about the abuse of power and the need for reform. But for now, Danielle focused on moving forward. She knew there was still much to be done. And as the world continued to react to the events of that fateful day, one thing was clear: Danielle Carter's actions had sparked a courtroom moment, read one major news outlet. Everywhere you looked, Danielle's name was splashed across the front pages. People were praising her for standing up to power and exposing the truth. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," one social media user tweeted. "Danielle Carter is the hero we need right now." But not everyone saw it that way. There were plenty of people who felt uncomfortable with how things went down. Some even claimed that Danielle had gone too far in embarrassing the judge, questioning whether her actions had been a little too extreme. But Danielle wasn't worried about the negative comments. She knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway's world was crumbling. His phone rang constantly with reporters asking for his side of the story. His office had never felt so empty, and the silence in the hallways of the courthouse was deafening. People who had once respected him were now questioning his every decision. He tried to keep his composure, but it was impossible. Every time he turned on the TV or checked his phone, there was Danielle calm, collected, and ready to take on the world. And there he was, the judge who had been made a fool of in front of everyone. In an attempt to save face, Judge Holloway issued a public statement, but it did little to quiet the storm. "The events in my courtroom today were unfortunate," he said. "I regret that things went as they did, but I stand by my decisions." The statement did nothing but fuel the fire. It was clear that the public wasn't buying it. People didn't want to hear excuses. They wanted accountability. And Danielle had given them exactly that. On the other side of the story, Danielle remained calm amidst the chaos. As much as she appreciated the support, she knew this was about something bigger than herself. It was about justice, fairness, and the importance of standing up against a broken system. The following week, Danielle appeared on several news programs, talking about what had happened in that courtroom. Her calm, unwavering voice cut through the noise, and each interview made her message clearer. "It's not just about what happened to me," she said. "It's about all the people who are overlooked, mistreated, and ignored by those who think they are above the law. I'm standing up for them." Her words resonated with millions. People who had been silent for too long now felt like they had a voice. They saw Danielle as a hero who wasn't afraid to speak out, even when it meant going up against someone with so much power. But even as Danielle's influence grew, Judge Calloway was still trying to salvage what little was left of his career. He called in his lawyer to discuss his next move, but deep down, he knew the damage had been done. The media had already made up their mind, and the public wasn't likely to forget what had happened anytime soon. The day after Danielle's interviews aired, she received a call from her supervisor at the Secret Service. "Danielle, you've made an impact," her supervisor said. "Your actions have brought attention to some serious issues, and we're proud of you." Danielle didn't let the praise go to her head. She was focused on the bigger picture, the work that still needed to be done. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. People who were uncomfortable with the changes she was pushing for would try to silence her. But she wasn't worried. She was ready for whatever came next. Back at the courthouse, the atmosphere was different. Staff members who once admired Judge Calloway were now avoiding him, unsure of what to say or how to act. His arrogance had cost him more than just his position. It had cost him the respect he'd worked so hard to build. In the days that followed, more details came to light about the misconduct that had taken place during Danielle's arrest. The officers involved in the incident were being investigated, and people were beginning to realize just how deep the corruption ran. Danielle's courage had done more than just expose a judge. It had opened up a much larger conversation about the abuse of power and the need for reform. But for now, Danielle focused on moving forward. She knew there was still much to be done. And as the world continued to react to the events of that fateful day, one thing was clear: Danielle Carter's actions had sparked it. Watching the news coverage of the fallout, she couldn't help but feel a little proud of what she had done. The world was paying attention, and people were starting to talk about the things that needed to change. But Danielle also knew that this wasn't a moment of celebration. It was just the beginning of a long fight. Back at the courthouse, things were unraveling for Judge Calloway. He'd been forced to take a leave of absence while the investigation into his conduct took place. Even his former supporters seemed to be pulling away. One of the senior judges at the courthouse, who had once been a close friend of Calloway's, was now speaking out against him. "This is a wake-up call for all of us," the senior judge said in an interview. "We can't continue to let people abuse their power without facing the consequences." Judge Calloway had no choice but to stay out of the public eye. His career was in freefall, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For Danielle, the journey was just beginning. She'd made an impact, yes, but she wasn't going to stop until she had helped make real change. The system had to be held accountable, and she was determined to do everything she could to ensure that happened. As the days passed, she received more and more support from people who shared her vision. They were all united by a common goal: justice. And Danielle knew that as long as she stayed true to her mission, she would have all the strength she needed to keep pushing forward. The world was watching, and Danielle Carter wasn't about to let them down.